Hello, and welcome to Illinois Learns to Hunt, Hunter Etiquette and Ethics. So before we get started with tonight's webinar, we're going to go over a few reminders. If this is your first webinar with us, welcome. If you're coming back after joining us with a previous webinar, welcome back. We're just going to go over a few things. Your microphone and webcams are disabled. If you have any questions for the presenters, you can use the Q&A window or the chat window, and we will answer those either live during the presentation or we will type them out and answer them in the chat. We will have time at the end for Q&A, so if you have any questions that pop up and we don't cover them, we'll have time at the end there to answer any of the leftover questions you may have. And if we don't answer them today, we are a resource for you, so remember us, and you can email us or Facebook message us at any time, and we'll help you out as you get into hunting here if you have any questions with hunting in Illinois. Then we will be sending out an email with a copy of this PowerPoint and a recording of this webinar. We will also be sending out a survey, which those surveys and people filling those surveys out is actually what brought us to make this webinar. We had several people asking for kind of public land hunting etiquette and things like that. So that's what made us put this together. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how hunter ethics are formed and good hunting etiquette and ethics on public land and also in general. Then we're going to go over each species and kind of specific etiquette and ethics that may come up while hunting different species in the state. At the very end, we'll have a scenario discussion where the presenters will sit back and discuss kind of some scenarios that may come up and how they might handle them. And again, at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. Our presenters tonight, we have Dan with us. Dan, would you like to say hello?
Good evening.
Hello. And we also have Adam. Adam, would you like to say hello?
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining us tonight.
We also have Curtis with us. Curtis, hello.
Hello, everybody.
Awesome. And then I'm Jason. Welcome, and we'll get started. So to start us off, we have Curtis. Go ahead.
All right, thanks, Jason. So to start off, we'll kind of go over some of these terms and how they apply to hunting. First off, etiquette. Generally, when I think about etiquette, I think about maybe eating a fancy dinner and which side the small fork is supposed to be on and all that stuff. But etiquette certainly has a role in hunting too. And at its core, the definition of etiquette is the customary code of polite behavior among members of a group. And so hunters are definitely a group, and hopefully we want to be a supportive group, and that means having proper etiquette. So we'll be talking about that in detail today. Now, related to etiquette is ethics, and ethics is a moral system of accepted beliefs used to guide behavior. And so this is something that every hunter basically needs to develop for themselves. And yeah, we're going to be talking about these two terms throughout the entirety of this webinar. So basically the hunting regulations are the baseline of what is to be followed, but your own hunting ethics are going to be the self-imposed guidelines that you basically put on yourself above and beyond that. And this can vary for each hunter, and that's fine. So if we talk about a brief history of ethics when it comes to hunting, if you go all the way back to the early days of hunting, obviously ethics did not exist. You know, this was all about survival. So nobody was questioning where Billy there is sticking the spear into the mastodon or mammoth. They just want to try to get that down and have something to eat and something warm to keep them warm during the night. So no ethics there. When we get into the market hunting, which of course was big here in North America prior to the modern era of conservation, again, ethics were not high on the totem pole. This was all about efficiency. It was about getting as much meat as you possibly could, or whatever they were after, feathers, so they could sell them. So again, not much for ethics. Now, when things started to move into what was called sport hunting, and this was as opposed to market hunting, the big shift here was an emphasis on regulating hunting, and then of course the ethical part of it, and this introduction of fair chase that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And then today we have modern day hunting, which is really something that's even evolved further to not only pride itself with an emphasis on ethics and regulations and science-driven management, but also with an increased emphasis on the image that hunters portray to non-hunters. So a lot of evolution here, but I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. And then in these next slides, we're going to be talking about some of these ethics that are basically apply to everybody, all hunters, no matter what species you're going after. And here's just a couple quotes. These are fun throughout the years. I thought it was cool that Aristotle has a writing, a quote attributed to him when it comes to hunting. So even way back then, there were folks who were questioning basically the ethics of hunting. So pretty interesting how far back that goes. And one quote here I'll read is from Aldo Leopold. Ethical behavior is doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when doing the right thing is legal. So this really showcases what we were talking about on the last slide, that basically your own hunting ethics are the self-imposed restrictions you put on yourself, even beyond the regulations. And yep, that varies by the individual, and then also the state, and even the species that you're hunting. So some flexibility, but when we get here in this next slide, we're going to start talking about the these are the things that are not flexible. So when it comes to ethics, some things are flexible and some are not. So an example of a flexible ethic might be if you have family members who are a part of a trophy white-tailed deer management club. And so they might practice a pretty strict management on deer, where they will take so many does and then only harvest mature bucks. And you might not care too much about trophy bucks. You're just a deer hunter. You want to get ethical shots and get good meat. But of course, if you hunt with them, you can abide by their ethics, because that's something that's flexible. But this here on this list, and we're going to talk through a lot of these apply to everybody in any normal circumstance. So definitely normal circumstance. Something like do not litter. If you sprain your ankle or something and you drop a bag on the ground, that's not a normal circumstance. So beyond anything like that, these are the things that you basically never want to get caught not following. And pretty easy. Safety first. Don't litter. Be cordial. Be a supportive group. Obey the regs. Like we mentioned, they're the baseline here for everything. Know all your property boundaries. Have a map, and it's on you, the outdoors person, to know where those boundaries are, and then obtain permission if you need to cross them. Always respect the critters in the land. Report violations. And I like this quote. It's from a popular outdoorsman and wild game cook, Hank Shaw. Don't yuck someone else's yum. And this is really, it goes back to being cordial with other outdoor users and being supportive. But basically, if somebody's out there and they're catching fish and they're keeping spawning walleye, but that's perfectly legal, that's their thing. It may not be something that you do or you agree with, but as long as somebody's out there doing something legal and enjoying the outdoors, let them do it. be a supportive group. So safety, this is one, never any excuse not to take safety very seriously. And this, of course, applies to the firearms and bows that you might be using. Of course, we hopefully remember tab K from Hunter's Education. A little way to remember the 4 basic rules of firearm safety. T is treat as every firearm is loaded. A for always keep your muzzle in a safe direction. B for be sure of your target and what's beyond. And then K for keep your finger out of the trigger guard until you're ready to shoot. So pretty good little way to remember that. But remember that most hunting accidents are not related to guns or bows. So it's this other preparation that is also your responsibility as an outdoors person to be ready for. And some of this stuff, you know, if you're going to a small piece of public land in Illinois, do you really need to bring a map and compass? Probably not, because you can straight line walk in about any direction and find a road within a couple miles. But certainly if you're getting anywhere in any big national forest or going out west, yeah, you need to have a map and compass, GPS, first aid kit, certainly water. And even in Illinois, even if you're on a piece of property that you're not worried about getting lost, you definitely need things like water, first aid kit, and even like a space blanket takes up hardly any room at all, but can really be an important thing if something happens and you know, maybe you do get hurt, you sprain an ankle or twist your knee and have to spend a night out there. That's gonna help you out. But the big thing, always tell somebody where and when you're going, just in case you don't come back. Somebody will have an idea of where to go look for you. So you could be somewhere in the woods where cell reception isn't good. So making sure to somebody knows where you're at, always a good idea. All right, littering, another one that's not flexible. Don't do it, not tolerated. I like to always carry a bag with me for a couple reasons. One, you might find a bevy of mushrooms, and we're getting to the tail end of morel season, but there's other edible mushrooms that do pop up in Illinois. So having a bag handy is good for that. But also, if you see some trash, just pick it up. You know, it's not yours, but if you're out there hoping to enjoy the land and maybe harvest a critter, so you might take something away from the land. Certainly feels nice to give back and take a little bit of trash away with you too. Share the resource. So this it goes right along with not yucking other people's yum, but remember, public land is open to everybody. Wildlife is a public trust resource. So basically all the critters, all the public land, it's open for all. Just because it might be a certain season doesn't mean that property may not be closed down to all other activities. So try to respect everybody else that's out there, and hopefully they'll respect you. And you know, if we do that, there's a lot of room for a lot of us to go out there in the outdoors and have a good time. And of course, we always got to say it, take somebody new. You know, it's not only good for hunting in general to get new people involved, but it sure is, I don't know, rewarding, I guess, to take somebody new and then to see them really enjoy themselves and pick up a new passion. Certainly something that's that sticks with you. Obey the regs. This is another one. It's not flexible at all. This is the baseline for fair chase, the baseline for basically all of our hunting ethics. And another thing I really want to point out here is when conflicting with an ethical obligation, the law always wins. And so an example here, maybe you're hunting on public land, archery hunting, and you hit a deer, it may not be the best hit. Deer goes a little bit further than you thought it would, and it winds up on private. If you can't reach the landowner, you've got to let it sit. And I know it's an ethical dilemma, because you know that you want to find that deer, make sure that you know that it's not suffering or anything like that. That's an ethical dilemma. But in this case, the law does win. Do not trespass. A wounded deer is not an excuse to trespass. So make every effort you can to contact that landowner. There are apps like the Onyx app or different apps they'll show you property owners. And a lot of times that can be a great way to get a hold of people. And generally, if you can get a hold of them and explain the situation, most people are going to grant you access to go look for that. So, and then ask questions. If you're not sure about something, especially if you're a new hunter, there's no shame in asking questions. Even people who've hunted their whole life ask questions all the time. And I know conservation police, wildlife managers, the biologists, all of them, they like questions, they enjoy that stuff. And they would certainly much rather people ask now rather than to do something wrong and get in trouble later. So, and then of course us, the Learn to Hunt team, we're here as a resource for you. So feel free if questions pop up, not just right now during this webinar, but in September, October, whenever it might be, we're always here to hopefully help you out on your hunting journey. All right, so when it comes to some of these ethical decisions that are flexible, please do not force your own ethics onto someone else. And again, this is the not yucking other people's yum. But some of these examples that we do see occasionally are the classic example of a hunter shooting a small buck, and then people commenting on that and basically shaming them for shooting that. Let it go so it can grow, all that sort of thing. And there's no place for that in the hunting community. That's not a supportive community. All hunters and basically all properties might have different management strategies and different priorities. So, and here's a picture of Fred Bear, widely thought of as one of the greatest hunters to ever walk. And I certainly don't think that's a Boone and Crockett deer he's kneeling beside. So I think if a little fork horn's good enough for Fred Bear, it's good enough for me every once in a while too. So, and this applies to methods too. Sometimes people will get hung up on certain methods of take, like crossbows. And again, just we like to be a supportive community. And as long as outdoors people are out there legally going after game, we should try to be right with them and not yuck their yum. All right, so I mentioned this term fair chase, right? This is brought up a lot in hunting, and this goes back to when Teddy Roosevelt started the Boone and Crockett Club. They defined fair chase as requiring hunted big game animals to be wild and free ranging. So that's pretty narrow in its definition. That was really, only applies to big game animals, and, just basically that they stay wild and they're not fenced in. And that was great, but really this has been expanded today to be much more all-inclusive of all the outdoor pursuits out there. And our hunting regulations are designed to set a baseline for fair chase. So that is taken into account when wildlife managers set the regulations in the wildlife code. Fair chase is certainly an aspect that's considered there. Now, when you add on additional things beyond the regulations, like somebody might choose to use a recurve bow, we need to remember that that is a balancing act, because while choosing a recurve bow might increase fair chase, or in other words, give the wildlife more of an advantage, It might also reduce the efficiency. It might reduce your range, or it might reduce your accuracy, which could reduce your ability to make a good shot. So all these things have to be obviously carefully weighed, and that's why they do vary a little bit person to person. And hey, that's what keeps hunting fun. So the difference is what keeps it interesting, I guess. So all these methods are going to change not only by species, but certainly by location, and certainly by technique as well. And classic example of how some of these things are different by species. Generally, roosts are not hunted for birds, any of our game birds, but hunting bedding areas for mammals is fine. So even the people who may stay away from deer bedding areas, things like squirrels, rabbits, obviously that's where primarily we're hunting. So a little different just for the different ways those two critters work. And with that, I am turning it over to Jason for some proper preparation.
Thanks a lot, Curtis. So along with all those other things that lead into ethics and etiquette is proper preparation. So making sure that you're comfortable and capable with the firearm or archery equipment that you're using. So this allows you to be a better hunter in all aspects when it comes to making a proper shot, making an ethical shot, and just being comfortable in the field and being a safe hunter as well. So knowing your equipment is a first step for sure, becoming a very ethical hunter, and it's very good etiquette. It's also good to make sure that you maintain and inspect your gear, because any malfunction could be dangerous for you or anyone in your hunting party. So knowing your gear, using your gear properly, and being comfortable with it is a very important part of becoming a very good hunter. So I mentioned an ethical shot. So ethical shots can vary between hunters. You can talk to some people who practice and they're very good at archery for up above 40 yards. A lot of new people want to keep it to 20 yards or 30 yards. It's whatever you're comfortable with. And you can get into discussions about that between hunter and hunter, but it really does come down to what can you do and what is your equipment capable of. So questions you might want to ask yourself when you're about to take a shot would be, are you following regulations? A lot of the time, shooting at light might be an issue. So I've seen a lot of deer and they were within shooting range of me, but it wasn't within shooting light and I couldn't see my sights as well, or it would have been just illegal to take the shot. So I would let those deer walk. So that's going to be a question you need to ask yourself if you're in a low light condition. You got to make sure you know when sun up and sundown is. Then you also want to know how far to shoot. So what is your accurate range, and is that deer within that range? I know last archery season, I actually did not get a deer. One ethic we're not going to talk about, actually, I don't think we mentioned it in here, is I had a fawn come under my stand late in the season. It would have been totally fine to take the fawn, but I let the fawn walk because I wasn't trying to shoot a small deer. And so if a doe would have came, I would have definitely taken the doe. But so that was within shooting range, but I saw plenty of shooting bucks and does, but they were just outside my range. So I let all those deer walk last year. And you might have a whole season like that. So that's just something to prepare yourself with. And you also want to make sure that your shooting lanes are clear. So if you're shooting through brush and you're not comfortable making that shot, you shouldn't make that shot. You want to make sure that the trajectory and the point of impact is going to hit the vitals of the deer. You're not going to be shooting through brush or at a deer that is quartering towards you. That's usually a shot that you don't want to make with archery equipment for sure. And make sure that that the animal is in a position that you can make a good shot on the animal and hit its vitals. Also, is the animal moving? So you see sometimes people taking shots, especially with shotguns, of a running deer across a field. That's not really considered an ethical shot because there's a lot of variables in that shot that it's just not worth taking and injuring that animal. We want to be as proficient at taking the animal down as we can be and not wounding an animal. Oh, excuse me. So don't let your desire to harvest an animal override your better judgment. There's a lot of times where you feel like this is the only deer or animal I've seen all season. I need to get this now, or I'm not going to get one. I will never see another animal again. And no, that's true. So just realize there's always next time. Don't take hunting so seriously that you're making bad judgments when you're out in the field. So again, with that ethical placement of shot placement, so it changes depending on what species you're going for. For birds and small game, they're so small that aiming for their vitals with usually using shot is not plausible. So you're going to want to aim for a headshot, and that's totally fine. When it comes to larger game, you're always going to want to aim for the vitals. You're never going to aim for the head or rear of the deer. You're always going to want to go preferably on a broadside deer behind the shoulder. You can also shoot at a quartering away deer, as long as you know where to place your sights. And a front shot is ethical, usually with using a gun. However, that might be a hard shot to make with archery equipment because there's a little bit more bone and muscle in the front of the deer there. So preferably, you're going to be aiming at a broadside deer behind its shoulder every time. So after the shot, so it is your responsibility, if it's a good shot or a bad shot, to make every effort you can to retrieve that animal. You pull the trigger and, oh, hold on. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, so you want to make sure that the body language is good, where the game was located at. You want to make sure you mark that, and you want to make sure you know the last place you saw the animal and listen for any crashing sounds or note of the location. So that way you can go and retrieve that animal the best you can, and make sure that when hunting deer, do not immediately go and look for the arrow or blood. You got to give the deer proper time to pass away. If you made a good shot on the deer, this could be a half hour to an hour. If you made a poor shot on the deer, this could be 2 to 3 to 4 hours, depending on how bad of a shot you made. And you can use blood to figure that out. And we go over that in Deer Hunting 102. But for example, this is a good shot on a deer because there's air bubbles in the blood, which means you made a heart or lung shot. And when you're hunting birds, we want to make sure you mark where the bird landed at. And this could be hard to actually find a pheasant in a field if you're not used to it, because you're usually walking through high shrub. So you want to make sure you mark where the bird landed, also where the bird landed. The bird, if you wounded it, could be running away from you. So you want to make sure you can get over there. So work with your hunting partner to keep an eye on the last known location as you walk towards the location that the bird fell. So again, there's wanton waste laws, and it basically means legally you are obligated to make every effort to retrieve this animal after you shoot it. And again, if you are bird hunting and you retrieve your bird before you want to retrieve your bird before shooting another one. This is usually, like an example would be in a dove field. Usually you shoot your dove, then you leave your gun at your seat, and then you can go out and retrieve your dove. And that's usually how the regs are on hunting public dove sites when you win the dove lottery in the spring, and not spring, but in the fall. Then also, if you're pheasant hunting or dove hunting and you can't retrieve that bird, it's sporting to count that as a lost bird as part of your daily bag limit. So if you're out pheasant hunting, usually the bag limit's 2, and you wound one and you can't find it, then that means you're only gonna, if you have one other one left for the day.
And again, that's one of those ethical decisions that you can personally make. Legally, you're not required to count that towards your bag limit if you are not able to retrieve that bird. But again, if you happen to fill your bag limit and then maybe you're walking back to the truck and you happen to find that other bird that you shot, well, now you're instantly over your bag limit. So that's one of those ethical decisions you personally need to make, just kind of before you head out there, or if that situation arises.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up, Dan. So, so then tracking your game, this is in here as a reminder that you can use dogs to track deer in Illinois, and that's totally legal. You will have to pay the dog tracker. Dan, what's the going rate that you had? You had it a couple of years ago where we actually used dogs. Do you remember?
Yeah, that's a excuse me. That's a good question, and it really depends on the tracker and how and in a lot of cases, their proximity to the location that you need the deer tracked. I used one about 3 years ago, and it took her probably 45 minutes or so to get to the site, and then about an hour or two of actually tracking and retrieving the deer, and then another 45 minutes for her to get back to her house. So it cost about $250. But again, without having that dog at this specific recovery, we would not have been able to find the deer. It was one of those instances where, I knew I made a less than ideal shot just by the way the deer reacted. He didn't jump up and immediately run off. When that happens, a lot of times that lets you know that you made a pretty good ethical shot, that you either got the heart or the lungs. But in my case, I got majority of the liver, and I clipped one of the lungs. And so that caused the deer to instantly kind of hunch over. And instead of running away, it just did this very slow, kind of methodical walk away, like it was in pain, obviously. And so that instantly tells me that, okay, I did not make the shot I wanted to. And so I immediately backed out. I didn't go find my arrow. I didn't start tracking. I waited about 45 minutes and I immediately just walked back to the car and gave that deer about, I think it was 6 or 7 hours by the time that the dog tracker got there to finally expire. And a lot of times on public land, you are not allowed to legally track with a dog during daylight hours. And so those deer recovery efforts utilizing a dog are going to have to be done at night. And so again, that's just some of these ethical decisions that you need to make, that, hey, are you willing to fork out that kind of money to try to recover a deer? And just kind of, again, keep that in the back of your mind. But if you ever do come to a scenario like that and you want to hire a dog tracker, if you Google the United Blood Trackers Association, there's typically a tracker or two that will cover every single county in the state. It's got their contact information on their website. You can just give them a quick call, shoot them a text, and they can, hopefully help you recover that deer.
Awesome, thank you. So again, with some game recovery, why you want to go get your game as soon as you can after letting it expire. You want to play close attention to the body language again, like we said. If the shot placement is not ideal, you want to give it the 2 to 3 hours or the 30 minutes to 1 hour if it is a good shot, depending on the ambient temperature. Bacterial growth really starts at above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So especially early season archery, it's probably going to be hotter than 40 degrees outside. You're going to want to go get that meat before it spoils. If you did make a bad placement, you want to make sure that you create more difficult tracking job and longer recovery time to go find it. But you can cut away any of that meat that's bad. And also, you might come across a deer. This happened to me one time. I had a deer we found the next morning, and its rump was eaten off by coyotes. This is a photograph that Dan took in central Illinois, where scavengers had found this one deer. This was not his deer. I think Dan, you stumbled across this one, correct?
Yeah, and I actually kind of wanted to tell a quick story about this, about stumbling across this deer, because I think it's pretty important, and it shows how difficult it can be to recover these animals. If you look closely, I know it's kind of a grotesque picture, and I apologize for that, but if you look at where that entry wound is, right behind the front shoulder, that to me looks about as perfect of shot placement as you could have. And my judgment from looking at where this entry point went in and where it exited, that deer did not live for probably more than 30 seconds after that shot was taken. You could tell it went straight through the heart, went straight through the lungs, and got a nice double lung and heart shot. And they were still unable to recover this deer. I actually ended up running into the hunter who shot this deer in the parking lot later that day and kind of told him where it was. And he goes, man, we probably walked right over top of that deer and they just could not find it. So again, these things do happen. And ethically, he came back, he was able to recover this deer. Obviously, you can tell a lot of the meat was wasted and contaminated. So I'm sure by the time he got it home, he probably noticed that there wasn't a ton of salvageable meat there. But again, he still at least did recover this deer and kind of put a close to that story. But again, I just kind of wanted to reiterate that even a perfectly placed shot, these are wild animals. They are tougher than you'll ever give them credit for. And they just keep going and keep going. And so oftentimes it's tough. But after talking to this individual in the parking lot, he kind of gave away a little error that I think he made. The second he took the shot, he said he went ahead and immediately climbed out of the tree stand, went to recover his arrow and start looking for it. And what that tells me is he probably spooked that deer in the last seconds of his life, and it made kind of a last little dash and probably found some thick cover before I kind of drug it out in the open here. And so again, just give those animals proper time to expire, and you'll have a nice, easy track and recovery job.
Yeah. And again, I'm sorry, my dogs are barking, so I kind of rushed through that one slide talking about after the shot. But when you take that shot, you're going to be high on adrenaline, and the deer's going to run off, and you'll be surprised at how quick you can get turned around when you walk 20 yards away from a tree. When you look back, you might not even be able to see the tree you're sitting in if you're not used to that area. So you could even take a photograph from your tree stand at where the deer was at and kind of get at your bearings, know your trees, know where you're at, take a photograph, know which direction they went in, and kind of piece it together from there. Because even on a good shot like this, and they didn't go that far, you can get turned around and almost lost in the woods trying to find the trail of a hit deer. All right. So also after recovery, your deer inspected for look for bloating and for any issues with the deer like that. If you can look for rotted meat by a green coloration of the meat or a bad smell coming off the deer, and you can use you can cut that part of the deer away. And if you take it to a butcher, the butcher will know how to handle that as well. Meat can be trimmed and removed, and if the entire carcass is spoiled, you can call a CPO and get a new tag. That's happened to me in the past where we shot a deer and it was probably a road. It got hit by a car, and when we went and found the deer, it had a fractured skull and it had infection in its head. And we called the CPO and they issued us a new tag because we shot a deer that was basically wounded. And
I should say, not every CPO is going to do that. That is a discretion call up to them. So don't take it, this is gospel that, if you don't recover a deer, they're going to give you a new tag. But again, it can happen. They can issue a new tag, but again, they don't always do that.
Yes. And also we have a YouTube video where we talk to a CPO, and you will be surprised at how much of their discretion is imposed on their daily work. So use the CPO will use discretion, so we can't count on that. So again, you want to make sure you handle your game properly. If you work that hard to get the meat, you don't want it to spoil and you don't want to mishandle it, so that way it's contaminated and it doesn't taste very well. So you want to make sure that you field dress the animal. That way you lower the body temperature, remove any source of bacteria, and that will make the animal lighter for packing it out. You also can leave the gut pile on public land. As a hunter, you shouldn't leave the gut pile in the middle of a trail. People are going to be hiking by. This is something that people don't want to have to walk around. So you want to try to keep it off trail, and you don't want to have it in the parking lot either, because people don't really want to be seeing that. So you want to make sure it's kind of just off to the side, and you can leave it out there. If you're on private land, you can talk to the landowner, and they can tell you what they would like you to do with the gut pile. You can also utilize game in other ways besides just eating it. So this might be something that you would be interested in as you harvest more game. You can use different body parts for different things. So you can just do your classic mounts and taxidermy. You can also make buckskin products and decor. This is a wing bone caul that Adam made before he painted it up. So this is a turkey wing bone that you can use to make a caul out of. You can also make crappie jigs with deer hair and leather products and mounts and things. So if you want to get creative and you want to utilize more of the animal, we encourage you to do so. And then proper disposal. So you don't want to be someone who dumps a carcass on the side of a back road. That's actually illegal. So people are surprised, but you can just put it in a trash bag and put it out with your regular trash. So there's carcasses in the way that you would dispose of any other type of table scraps or something like that. You can just throw it out with your regular trash, and your garbage men will come and get it. So,
and I've learned kind of a nice trick that, especially if it's really warm outside and maybe you went squirrel or hunting maybe right when the season started in mid-August and it's still 80 or 90 degrees out. If you go and throw those scraps in your trash can immediately, it's going to stink to high heaven. And so what I've started doing, particularly in the warmer months, is I'll just throw them in a big black trash bag, throw them in the deep freezer, let them get a nice freeze on them. And then the day before the trash man comes and picks up your dumpster, just go ahead and throw them out then. And that's a nice way to keep the neighbors happy and keep the smell down, but also still get rid of that waste in a good and respectful way.
There you go. Nice. And then also we have picture etiquette. So you want to make sure your appearance of the animal is respectful, and make sure that it's in a natural setting. So not really in your vehicle or in the back of a pickup truck. Having it kind of out in the field looks a lot nicer. And you want to have the animal in a good position. So these are examples of some turkey photos that one of Adam's friends took this past season when they lucked out and got some turkeys. So you want to try to conceal any large wounds, make sure there's no like bloody tongue hanging out of the deer's mouth, things like that. And you want to include your gun or bow, and you want to make sure that all the photos that you're taking are legal. You can try to make sure that the tag is visible, especially if it's a deer or any animal. Make sure the tag is visible and things like that. Make sure you're wearing orange if it's required and things along those lines. So that way you're not putting up any type of what may be like presumed to be an illegal activity. So make sure you keep it all legal in the photographs that you post online, and make sure you include your story along with it. So these guys, you can see in this post here, they had to go hunting for 4 days and they woke up early in the morning and it was really hard to go get it. And then you can also include later on the cooked game meat, showing the full circle of the process, and you enjoying the meat after you've harvested it. You want to add anything, Dan? I thought I heard a mic.
No, I think that's perfect. The only thing I would add, and I'm not saying this to scare you, but it just kind of lends credence to what Jason talked about, making sure that you're taking these pictures in a way that portrays the legality of the hunt. So again, have it tagged, have your hunter orange on if it's required. There are conservation officers that do go through Facebook and they do find violations that way. I actually saw a news article, I believe it was in Iowa, but there was a conservation officer who was on one of the common dating apps. I can't remember if it was Tinder or one of those types of apps, but he actually got a match and they started kind of conversing back and forth, and she ended up confessing to poaching this really big deer, and he made a whole case out of it. So just be careful about what you pose online. Again, we're trying to portray the legality and the ethical side of hunting, and so just make sure that your photos portray that, because again, you're going to be following all these regulations anyway. So you might as well make sure that you're taking that nice picture that you're going to hang on your wall or share with friends and family that can, kind of confirms the legality of that hunt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't watch it too often, but I definitely saw a case on Northwoods Law when I was visiting my parents. They had it on, and there's a post on a Facebook post or something like that where they went and busted a guy who was poaching and was posting photos. So yeah, also don't post, don't poach either. So that will keep you from getting busted too. All right, we're gonna move on to public land etiquette with Adam. Go ahead, Adam.
Thanks, Jason. Yep. So now we're going to be talking about how to go about hunting public land and how to use proper etiquette in public land areas. So a few things we're going to note here. Going to talk about knowing your boundaries, parking areas, site-specific regulations, other users of the public land, talking to fellow hunters, and how to communicate. So first off, starting off with boundaries here. So of course, I believe Curtis mentioned it earlier, know your boundaries. This can save you a lot of heartache and headache. There's a few ways that people denote where the public and private lines are. One way that's getting a lot more popular is this purple paint. As you guys can see the top right picture. It should be like a good big stripe of purple paint on the trees that mark the line. So if you see that, that's what that means. Of course, no hunting signs, private property signs, or no hunt area signs. Some people have no hunting, denoting the private line, but there also are no hunt areas within certain public lands. Usually that's nearby the parking lots and so on. But if you do look at the public land map on the IDNR website, those should be denoted.
And another kind of ethical decision that you need to make, particularly in turn hunting, is how far you are willing to, or how close you are willing to get to those private land boundaries. As you get more experience with deer hunting, you'll start to notice that in a lot of cases, these private land areas that are adjacent directly to public land that may have some kind of contiguous habitat, whether it's a big forest stand that kind of comprises both public and private. There's always a few hunters that will sit right alongside of that private line and wait for the deer to come onto public, and then take that shot. Again, that is completely legal and 100% okay. The ethical decision that you need to make is how close are you willing to get to that line? Because the closer you get to that line, the higher likelihood that deer is going to end up back on that private property after you take a shot. And again, like Curtis brought up earlier, just because you have a wounded animal and you're tracking it, that does not give you permission to trespass. And so me personally, I don't like to hunt within about 150 to 200 yards of private land, just because it gives me that little bit of flexibility and a little bit of buffer around my immediate location, that I'm pretty content that if I take a shot at a deer, it's not going to go much further than 100 yards at most, and should stay completely on public land. So again, that's just something to be thinking about while you're out there scouting. You may stumble upon this beautiful site and it's right on the line. You're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. But you may want to try to contact that private landowner ahead of time and say, hey, I'm going to be hunting on the public side, but I just wanted to reach out to you in case I happen to take a shot and it happens to run back on your property. Can I get permission to recover it? So just kind of those are the things that we're thinking about while we're out there scouting and while we're out there hunting. So that's just another example of not necessarily understanding the property boundaries, but understanding how far ethically you're kind of willing to push that envelope.
Great point, Dan. Thanks for bringing that up. Moving on, we're going to be talking about parking areas. So most public sites require you to park in a designated parking spot or lot. Make sure to be aware of the parking lots so you can park at the spot that it gives you the most advantage of getting to your hunting area or where you want to set up. And most sites do not let you park on the side of the road. There are certain few sites that I've ran into that do, but just to make sure, always contact the site office or the conservation police officer for that area and ask them, just to make sure. Of course, you don't want to have to deal with getting a ticket just for parking in the wrong spot. So again, if you look at the IDNR maps on the IDNR website for each public land, they will have a map drawn out with all the no hunt areas and all the parking lots mapped out. So moving on to site-specific regs. So each hunting site has its site-specific regulations. These tell you all the rules, the do's and don'ts, what game you can hunt, how you can hunt the game, what type of ammunition you can use, so on and so forth. And this link right here at the bottom of the slide is the directory for all the public sites. And from there, you will be able to access each site-specific regulation sheet. And I think if we go to the next slide, we'll show you guys what those look like. Yep, so here on the right, this is just a screenshot of a site-specific regulation sheet from a site that's near Champaign, close to us. And again, this will tell you all the check-in, check-out procedures, whether you need a windshield card or a sign-in, sign-out sheet. And again, if you look at here, you can see all the total acres, open water, huntable acres, and all the species you're able to hunt and when the season is. So if you plan on doing a lot of public land hunting, those are your best friend. Be sure to study those sheets. Moving on to other public land users. So of course, you're going to be, at some point, you're going to run into somebody else who's out there who may not be hunting. A bunch of the sites by us in Champaign, there's always a lot of horseback riders because there's plenty of horse trails that go throughout the public land. One site has a lot of mountain bikers. And of course, every site's going to have hikers, foragers, dog trainers, dog walkers. So be sure to treat everyone with respect. They all have the same right to be out there as you. So, say hi, be nice, maybe even ask them what they've been seeing. If, if they're riding horses out there all the time, they might know where all the good deer hunting spots are. So it's always nice to strike up a conversation and just pick everyone's brain and ask them what they've been seeing. And of course, if you see other users doing something they shouldn't, of course, contact the CPO, because everyone should be treating the land, with respect and doing everything legally. So if they are not, make sure to report that.
And I'm gonna jump in here really quick too. Is a lot of this webinar has been kind of focused on what we can do as hunters to promote ourselves ethically, but there's also some really important legislation that I want to kind of bring to your attention, that us as hunters, we have protection, that people cannot come out and harass us while we are hunting. Again, the vast majority, I think the last survey I read was about 78% of Americans support ethical hunting. So again, the large and the vast majority of Americans are for, again, sustainable hunting. But occasionally, again, there are some of those bad apples, whether it's an activist group or anything like that. But if you ever do come to a scenario where you are being harassed as a hunter, you can call the conservation police officer for the county, or even the local police department, and they will send someone, because that is a criminal violation. They cannot harass you while you are trying to legally partake in hunting. So just kind of keep that in mind, that again, the majority of other recreational users are going to support you. I mean, the vast majority I've met are, hey, yeah, you look like you're having fun. You seen anything? And they'll kind of, shoot the talk with you for a few minutes. And like Adam said, a lot of times they've spent just as much, if not more time in some of these areas than you have. And so they can always kind of give you a little bit of insight. Yeah, we were down there, a mile down the road, we saw a couple deer out in the field, and that's good information. But again, if you ever get to a place where you are being harassed as a hunter, just remember that there is legal legislation on your behalf in that scenario.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. So moving on to talking to fellow hunters. So it kind of goes back to what we were just saying, talking to the other users. But talking to the other hunters is just as important, if not more important, because they're actually partaking in the same activity that you are doing. So they're a super great resource. Chatting them up in the parking lot while you're getting your gear on is a perfect time to do it. Or when you guys are coming back from the hunt and you guys run into each other in the parking lot, good time there too. Make sure to ask where they're going. That's always a super important thing. They might not give you the exact, point of where they plan on going, but they might say, oh, the second field on the left off this road or whatever like that. So at least then you'll know that you won't be, if you don't go that way, you won't be interfering with their hunt. So just remember that both parties want to achieve the same goal. Both of you are out there to, harvest deer and participate in hunting. So always help each other out.
And I kind of like to view parking lots as kind of a perfect opportunity to take this kind of the next step. Historically, if you've hunted in Illinois for, a decade or two, you've been used to, going to these physical check-in stations that you had to take your deer after the harvest. And there was always this kind of really social camaraderie that was built among the hunting community in those local areas, because everybody brings their deer, you're all swapping stories about what you saw today and blah blah blah, and it just really dives into the camaraderie of the hunt. Well, since a lot of states have been shifting to an online or a telecheck system, we've kind of lost that camaraderie in a lot of cases. And what I've noticed, particularly in public land on Illinois, is the parking lots are a great option for that, because again, like Adam mentioned, in many of these sites, you can't just park along the road. So it does kind of congest everybody to a few parking lots. And it's great to just hang out and talk. There's been a few days where I was bored, but I knew I couldn't get out after work. And so I would just go to the parking lot and kind of wait till everyone got back and just kind of, again, talk and see what everyone's seeing. It's a great way to monitor deer behavior on kind of a landscape level, particularly as you get closer and closer to rut. You can always just kind of pick up little hints like, oh yeah, I saw, a young buck chasing a doe. And then the next day, oh, I saw a nice big 8-pointer. He was making a scrape. And it can really just help you kind of build your social support, but also just your overall knowledge of what's going on at that individual property. So definitely don't be, afraid to talk to other hunters. There are some cases where people don't want to talk to you, and that's fine. That's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yep. Okay, so moving on to how to communicate to these other hunters. So of course, start the conversation how you would with any new person. You may introduce yourself, tell the other hunter what your plan is and what you're hunting for. This should open up the conversation while you're getting your gear ready. You've been seeing, just like Dan, this is perfect time to ask, are the deer rutting? What are they feeding on? Are they feeding on acorns in the evening? Or are they on the wheat field in the morning? Stuff like that. So that just, helps you put the little pieces of the puzzle together to understand what the deer are doing on the landscape. And again, just like Dan mentioned, not all hunters want to communicate frustrated.
And make sure it's not a one-way conversation too. I've had instances where, I've had people, hey, what'd you see? Blah, blah, blah. And I tell them the whole spiel and they just kind of, don't respond or just kind of walk away. I've had that a few times. So try to make it a two-way conversation if you can.
Yes. So this moves us to how far apart do you want to set up when you guys are on public land? So usually you want to be set up about 200 to 300 yards away from another hunter. This would be ideal if there's a lot of people in the woods. If you can get even further, that's even better. But if it's getting rut and there's a lot of hunters out, you at least want to put a good distance between the next. If it can't be done due to the size of the woods, you want to at least be completely out of sight. Pay attention to the wind. Still try to increase the chances of success for both you and the other hunter. Make sure the wind isn't blowing towards, walk past, or you're back where they're going, and hopefully the wind isn't you, so you still have a good opportunity to have a good hunt. Of course, there's always going above and beyond. Make sure to go volunteer for habitat work days at public sites. This is a great way to meet the people that use the area, whether they're hunters or not. But of course, everyone loves the land and loves to partake in maintaining it. So perfect time to learn all about wildlife and management and meet new people. And there's other organizations that do it as well. For example, Pheasants Forever does a ton of these around the state. As well as a bunch of other conservation organizations. So make sure to look those up and participate in some habitat management and work days. Of course, as we mentioned, make sure to pick up the trash if you see anything scouting. Spent shotgun shells are kind of the thing you. And so, bring a trash bag with you if you're able to, and, make sure to treat the land how you'd want it to be treated and pick up the trash after other people.
Did we lose Adam?
Hello?
Oh, I think we lost you.
To the next one.
I have a feeling he's lagged on the last slide. And Adam, can you hear us?
Just go ahead and move on to deer, Jason. I'll take over.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to do kind of a deep dive into very specific etiquette that's related to a specific species. And obviously the holy grail and the pinnacle of Illinois hunting for a lot of people is deer. So there's a few things to kind of keep in mind when you're out there deer hunting, just to, again, maintain that hunter etiquette and that hunter ethic between you and other hunters. And the biggest and kind of most critical thing that you can do as another hunter to not disturb somebody else's hunt is to maintain proper distance between yourself and them. And again, like Adam mentioned, this is going to be very dependent on the specific terrain, how big the site is. But for me personally, I try to get to the point where I feel comfortable that that individual, over there is not going to interrupt my hunt, and that I'm far enough that I'm not going to interrupt his hunt or her hunt. And so in my personal preference, I try to stay, about 300 to 400 yards is kind of a good rule of thumb for me. Again, we all want to try to achieve the same goal. We're all trying to harvest the deer while we're out there. So we don't want to crowd another hunter. We want to make sure to give them ample space, but also that they give us ample space. Now, on public land, spots are first come, first served. So just remember, it is not your spot. It's a spot that maybe you've picked out to hunt, but if somebody's already there before you, tough luck. That's just the way public land hunting is. And so typically, I like to have 4 to 5 different spots picked out, so that if I, encounter that scenario where I get all the way back to my spot, maybe I've, hiked a mile and I'm back here and, oh, there's already somebody here. Well, now I at least have kind of a backup plan that I can go to and at least try to still get a productive hunt in. Now, as you're kind of communicating with other hunters, if you want to advance the slide a little bit, Jason, it's really important to keep your eyes and your ears open as you're kind of walking in, particularly with deer hunting. We're either walking in at 0 dark 30 before the sun comes up, or we're walking in at about 1 in the afternoon or so, depending on how early you want to get out there. But most hunters for a morning hunt, they are going to be completely set up in their stand, quiet and ready, about 30 minutes before legal shooting light. And for deer, legal shooting light is 30 minutes before sunrise. And so you can just kind of do some math. Most hunters are going to be set up about an hour before sunrise. So what that tells you is that tells you how early you need to get there if you want to secure that spot. Because remember, again, it's first come, first served. But over the years, hunters have kind of developed this unique language while we're out hunting in the dark, and kind of not hunting in the dark, but getting to our spots in the dark. In a lot of cases, people will kind of utilize flashlights to just kind of quickly signal, hey, I'm already here, and go the other way. And so if you're ever out there and you see somebody, flash a flashlight at you 2 or 3 times and keep doing it, chances are they're already set up in that location, and it's your prerogative to then move and try to find a new location. Now, if it's daylight, you might run into people waving. I've had some people whistle. I typically don't talk or holler at people. That's kind of a last resort for many people, because again, that's going to spook the animal that you're trying to hunt. But again, just pay attention to that flashing of a flashlight, whistling, waving, things like that. Remember, most hunters aren't going to be on the ground, so occasionally it does behoove you to kind of pay attention to what's up in the tree. I don't know how many instances I've had where, I've had a hunter walk directly underneath my tree, and they never, ever knew I was there, just because they're always looking down. So just kind of, again, pick your head up every now and again, try to see if you see any other hunters, or if you hear somebody, whistling or waving at you, and that just kind of lets you know to move to a new location. So again, there's no set distance that you need to legally maintain for deer hunting on public land in Illinois. But again, I like to do that kind of 300 to 400 yards at a bare minimum. And if I can, I like to get a lot further than that. But again, like Adam mentioned, as you get closer to rut and peak rut, you're going to see a big boom in the amount of people that are hunting at that site. And it may just not be reasonable, and it may not happen that you can get a space that's that big. But again, you can kind of utilize the terrain to your advantage. Maybe there's a river that flows between you and another person. Well, in that case, you probably don't need to be 400 yards apart. Maybe 200 yards or 150 yards is enough, because again, that physical barrier is there. Like Jason mentioned when we were talking about shot placement, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I just want to reiterate, the only shot that anyone should ever make on a deer or any wild animal is a quality shot. If the deer never presents that opportunity that you've planned for and that you've trained for, then let that deer walk. It's a lot better to let that deer walk than have that moment of realization after you take a shot and, oh no, what did I just do? Because maybe you took a shot that was too far and the deer had chances to move, and maybe you ended up hitting it in the rump. Well, chances are that deer is not going to die, and he's going to have some pain and potentially some infection. So again, we want to always shoot at what you are comfortable shooting. If you're only comfortable at shooting 20 yards with a bow, don't let anyone pressure you to shoot further than that. Stick within that effective range that you personally are comfortable with, and that'll lead you to the best results and the best chance for success and for a nice, clean harvest. Another thing I want to kind of mention, as especially with archery equipment, the body language of the deer is going to tell you a lot about how he or she is going to react to your shot. Remember, a firearm, it's basically instantaneous. By the time that the deer hears that sound, the bullet has already gone through their entire body cavity. Where in archery, there is going to be a delay. They're going to hear the sound, and then they're going to feel the arrow. And there is, depending on what equipment you're using, depending on the distance, there is chance for that deer to react to the sound of your bow going off before the arrow hits that animal. And so that's why it's so important that you focus on those short distance shots that are really effective. But you can get a little bit more distance out of your effective range, assuming that you're comfortable shooting that far at a standing target, if that deer is completely content. If that deer is already alarmed, maybe she or he smells you. A pretty common thing that you'll see does do, particularly if they smell or hear you, they're going to kind of look at you and start bobbing their head. And I was actually taking out a past learn to hunt participant on a turkey hunt earlier a few weeks ago, and we had a couple does sneak into about 15 or 20 yards, and she locked eyes with us, and she started doing this little bob and head weave. And what she's doing is she knows something's up, so she's kind of already at alert. And so just pay attention to that body language, because if it's an already alert deer, your effective range should be a little bit closer, because they will have time to react to that arrow. And since they're already alert, chances are they are going to react. So again, just kind of as an example, at a alert deer, I personally won't shoot past 20 yards, where if it's a very calm and relaxed deer, I feel comfortable taking a shot at about 30 to 35, and again, in the right circumstances. So those are just some of the things to think about and to keep in your mind as you deer hunt. Another big one that I kind of see a lot is this concept of in-season scouting, particularly on public land. And you'll see a lot of people kind of shaming other hunters while they're out there kind of walking around scouting. What are you doing? We're out here deer hunting, you're out here walking around scouting. You can scout during the season, and I do it personally a lot, but it's important to time that scouting activity away from the kind of the peak hunting hours, so to speak. So your peak hunting hours are, again, going to be that opening of legal light, so 30 minutes before sunrise to about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and then about 1 p.m. to 1:30 until that close of legal light, 30 minutes after sunrise. And so that middle of the day is a great time to get out there and do some scouting during the season, where chances are you're not going to interrupt too many people's hunts. Now, the closer you get to rut, there will be a lot of hunters who will do a full day sit. So you can kind of think of it Halloween through mid-November. I wouldn't do a ton of in-season scouting. I might scout on the way to my stand and on the way back, and do a little short scouting trip in the middle of the day. But I'm always paying attention to look up in the trees, see if I see another hunter, and just kind of to pay attention to that. But again, you can in-season scout. Just try to do it away from those peak hunting hours. Another big kind of topic that I want to address is the concept of tree stands. So some public sites, again, some do allow you to leave tree stands or ground blinds up for the duration of the season. Now that will be specified in those hunter fact sheets that Adam referred to earlier about the public Illinois DNR sites. Now, if you are allowed to leave that tree stand up, it is fair game for other hunters to use. But you also will need to write your conservation number and your name and contact information on that tree stand, just so that if a CPO stumbles across it, they can contact you. Now, again, if it's not allowed, you must remove your tree stand and blind daily. And I've never asked a conservation officer this question, but I would have to say this is the number one most violated wild game law in the state. I mean, I don't know how many times I've walked through public land and counted a dozen tree stands in a single day in areas where you're not supposed to leave tree stands. So it is common. Now, what I do in that case, you can mark it on a GPS and send that information to a conservation police officer, and they will, do an investigation and blah, blah, blah. So you can go that route as well. Or you can let the site superintendent know at that site, again, if that's your preference to report it. But again, please, 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 if you're not allowed to leave tree stands, just take it with you. It's not that difficult.
Yeah, and going with that same thing, Dan, the things that bummed me out, I saw at least 2 stands in the public land site that I hunt where they had stands that were left there, which they weren't allowed to, and they also cut down trees or shrubs and things to make shooting lanes, which is also not allowed. So you're not allowed to break branches or anything like that, and it just makes hunters look bad. It's just not, again, we're talking about ethics. So try not to do that if you're out hunting. Don't be snapping branches and things like that. One guy went to the extent of making a mock scrape, and he had cut a bunch of things down and made this huge big mess. And so I took a GPS point of that. That's the first time I ever took a GPS point and then sent it to the CO, because it was just a big mess that he made in the woods that he shouldn't have done.
Great point. Another big kind of topic of discussion is the concept of utilizing trail cameras on public land. And I'll give you my personal preference and kind of some, a little bit of backstory, particularly about this picture here and what it kind of led to. So again, trail cameras can be used on public land in Illinois, but as this story that I'll kind of describe here in a few minutes, theft and tampering does occur. I've had several trail cameras stolen. But what I've found to be a lot more common these days is they will leave up the entire trail camera, but they will either take your memory card and steal it and download the pictures for themselves. Or in some cases, I've had people break the memory card in half. I've had them erase the memory card. I've had them pull batteries out of the camera. Pretty much everything is up in the air when it comes to trail cameras. But if you happen to see somebody else's trail camera, just walk by, make a funny face, give them a funny photo, and just go right on about your way. There's no need to steal somebody else's camera. But there are a few things you can do as a hunter to protect your cameras a little bit. One thing that I've started doing the past few years is, instead of just hanging a trail camera at kind of eye level for a deer. So you can see this deer is basically looking right at the camera. So that camera is about 3 feet off the ground, strapped to the side of a tree. Every hunter knows what a trail camera looks like. They know where typically hunters put them. But what I've started doing is carrying basically a small ladder with me. So they sell, shooting or climbing sticks that you can use to put against a tree, so you can climb that tree to climb up to your tree stand. I've started carrying 2 or 3 of those with me, and I will put the trail camera up high and point it down. And what that does is that, again, most hunters, like I alluded to earlier, aren't looking up. They're always looking at their feet, always looking for tracks and scat and other things like this. So that just, again, out of sight, out of mind. But a story like this deer here. So this deer was on public land in Illinois, and it's a fairly, it's a nice deer. This is what most people would consider a fairly big, mature buck. And word started to spread around this public site that this deer was out there. And I ended up losing 3 different trail cameras, all in the span of about 2 weeks on public land. And my hypothesis and my theory is because somebody was after this deer, and they wanted this specific deer, and they didn't want other people to know that he's out there and what his actions and movements are. So again, I just wanted to reiterate, big bucks do make people do some, I'll just say it, some dumb things. But again, trail cameras are legal. Just protect yourself and protect your investment, whether it's using a locking system or getting them elevated in the tree so they're kind of out of sight and out of mind. As we kind of alluded to already, field dressing is a very important step in preserving the wholesomeness and the quality of your harvest. So it's important to do it rather quickly. But what I want to personally say is take the effort to drag that carcass to an area where it's out of sight and out of mind. The scavengers are going to clean up that gut pile within a matter of that evening. The next morning, it's likely going to be gone. But you don't want to, like Jason mentioned, you don't want to leave it next to a trail. Don't leave it next to a parking lot. Try to get it out, away from people. Typically, that's going to be right where the deer died. You can probably just do that gutting and field dressing process right there. Now, a little bit of turkey hunting etiquette. Again, turkey hunting in Illinois stops at 1 p.m. Now there are some very specific sites. Like I was hunting Kankakee River a few weeks ago with a buddy, and that site closes at around noon. So you cannot legally hunt turkey after 12. And the whole theory of that is to allow the birds to have some natural, to basically give them some sanctuary overnight so they can do their standard breeding behavior, so they can get up to a roost safely. Because if a turkey cannot get up to a roost before dark hits, it doesn't have the ability to get up in that tree after dark. And what that does is it causes increased predation rates. It opens them up to hypothermia from the dew that may settle on that underlying low vegetation. And so you don't want to get too close to these roosts that you bump these birds out. So give them time to get up on the roost. And if you are wanting to hunt a roost in the morning, maybe you located that roost at night, try to stay within about 150 to 200 yards away from that roost. That still gives you plenty of flexibility to try to draw that tom into you, but it allows them to kind of safely stay up on the roost until it's time for them to fly down. Also, don't shoot at birds in the roost. Now I know in Illinois, I believe I don't want to quote the regulation off the top of my head, but there is a certain time that you can legally shoot a tom or a turkey out of a roost. But ethically, that's a decision. I don't like to shoot birds at the roost. I'm going to let them come to the ground before I would take that shot. And also, don't wear turkey colors. Don't wear red, white, or blue, because those are kind of the colors that every single turkey hunter is going to be looking for, because that's the color of a turkey's head. And when that turkey gets fired up, man, that red, white, and blue is about as vibrant as it can be. And so when you're out there, just make sure that you're not wearing, that red, white, and blue. And when you're out turkey hunting, I personally, again, legally, you don't have to wear blaze orange or any kind of, hunter visibility pink or orange. But I personally, on my decoy bag that I carry, it has a little kind of blaze orange flag. And so oftentimes when I'm actually walking around, I will flip that down, expose that, so I have this nice big blaze orange patch on the back of me. And when I get to a spot where I'm going to set up some decoys and start doing some calling, I can kind of tuck that away. So it just gives some visibility for you and an extra piece of safety. Now we'll get into waterfowl hunting, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. There's several different kind of schools of thought when it comes to waterfowl. There's a very diverse group of individuals who waterfowl. There's some really hardcore, old timer waterfowls who've been hunting, waterfowl for decades. And then we kind of have this new breed of duck hunters. And there's some real ethical distinctions between the two groups. And we'll kind of discuss a few of those as we kind of transition through this. But one of the more important things is that I mentioned, with deer and with small game and with turkey, there's not a set distance that you need to maintain between hunting parties. With waterfowl, there is. So you must maintain a distance of at least 200 yards between hunting parties. I would personally stay on the extended range of that. So I would try to get 300 to 350 yards if possible. Now, in a lot of cases, that's not going to be possible just because it's going to be a blind 200 yards, blind 200 yards, blind 200 yards. It's spaced out almost perfectly in a lot of cases. But again, that ensures safety and it ensures uninterrupted hunts. And that uninterrupted hunts will make a little bit more sense as we kind of move through these next few slides. So this is a big one that I run into a lot on public land. And I know I'm probably still guilty of it. There would probably be plenty of waterfowl hunters who say I still overcall the way I hunt. I know when I first started waterfowl hunting, I was on that call nonstop, just whack, 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 pretty much every 15 seconds. And not only is that going to make your hunt not very successful, but it's also going to make angry every other duck hunter who can hear you. It gets exhausting listening to it for an hour or two. So again, not only does it sound unnatural, but it's also unpleasing to other hunters. But more importantly, it also impacts other hunters. So a good way to describe it is, let's say you're a brand new duck hunter and maybe you're not sure what it looks like when ducks are committed to your specific decoy spread. Maybe it looks like they're circling over the neighbor's blinds. There's a lot of duck hunters out there who would see those birds circling another blind, and they would start calling and try to lure those birds away from another blind. Now, me personally, I will never call at birds that are already committed to another person's blind. Now, the second those birds either A, get shot at, or B, flare off, which means they see something they don't like, whether it's the decoy spread didn't look right, maybe they saw some movement that didn't look right, or maybe the calling just didn't convince them to come in and they flare off. At that point, you can start calling. But again, if they're circling overhead or it looks like they're committed to another hunter's blind, just let that flock go. They've already committed, and all it's going to do is cause a big yell match between the other blind and you. And again, hopefully they would do the same thing for you. If you have ducks circling above you, hopefully they would, be ethically inclined to not call at those birds and to let you continue working them. Another really common term that you'll hear from waterfowl hunters is this term sky blasting or sky busting. And every duck hunter or goose hunter that you interact with is going to have a very specific kind of predefined definition of what they personally view sky busting or sky blasting as. But me personally, I define it as continually. I want to kind of highlight and bold that keyword continually, shooting birds that are out of range. We all make mistakes. We all get, the adrenaline rush, and it's hard to judge distance on flying birds. And so your first few hunts, you may shoot it at birds that are consistently out of range. But as you get more experience, you'll start to pick up and find out that kind of max effective range that you are efficient with your equipment, with your shell, and the individual choke tube that you're using, right? But if you continually shoot at birds that are out of range, that's what a lot of people call sky blasting or sky busting, because there's people in public land that the birds will be 80 yards above the blind, and they'll just be unloading their shotguns at these birds. You are not going to kill a bird at that distance. You will hit them and you will injure them, but you will not harvest them. And so again, as ethical hunters, we want to only take shots that are going to result in a recovered animal. That's our ultimate goal, right? And so make sure that you're taking those shots that you're comfortable with and that your effective range. So my personal setup with my shotgun and a full choke and the shotgun shells that I use for duck hunting, my effective range is about 30 to 35 yards. Any further than that, I'm not taking a shot. There's no point, because again, I will likely hit the bird, but I'm not gonna kill it, and chances are I'm just going to injure it. And again, actually, if you can go back for just 1 second, I do want to point out another big point of this is that it's also going to scare off any decoying birds, because there's maybe that flock is 80 yards above you, but maybe they're flying directly to another blind, and all you're doing is just shooting at them and scaring them off and causing them to flare and go completely somewhere else. So again, not only is it not ethical to the animal, but it's also not ethical to our other hunters.
And while we're talking about sky blasting, I want to just mention the opposite of that, which would be water swatting. So shooting a duck off the water is not illegal. It's again one of those ethical decisions. I personally don't do it because I enjoy having to shoot them out of the air. That's something I enjoy. But if I have a new hunter with me, especially a young hunter, if they want to shoot one off the water, as long as they don't hit my decoys, it's not an ethical decision I have any problems with, because I do know if it's close and on the water, they're probably going to get a good ethical kill, which is good, but not something that I want to do. So just wanted to throw that out there as another ethical decision with waterfowl, and basically the opposite of sky blasting.
Yeah, great point. And I'll kind of take that a step further. And I kind of share the same sentiment with you, Curtis, that personally, I will not water swat a bird. However, I have done it in very rare instances. And as you progress as a waterfowl hunter, you're likely going to encounter these instances as well. Is maybe you hit a mallard, you hit a northern shoveler, and it's just sitting there on the water. And as you try to approach it or get closer, it just slowly starts to swim away, and you can just never catch up to it. Now, in that case, I will take that second follow-up shot on the water and quote unquote water swat that bird, just to again end its suffering and make sure I can recover that already injured animal that I've already shot once. I just want to go ahead and make that nice follow-up shot. So in that, again, these are the ethical decisions that you kind of personally need to prepare yourself for and kind of think through how you would interact with some of these scenarios. Because in a lot of cases, your adrenaline's going to be pumping. You might be a little bit nervous and a little bit tense, and you may not be thinking things through completely. So just kind of having this baseline thought process, at least somewhat in your head, can allow you to have some critical thinking in those times when that adrenaline's pumping a little bit. Now, moving forward with waterfowl etiquette, target identification, I think, is one of the keys to waterfowl etiquette and ethics and waterfowl hunting in general. There are a lot of waterfowl hunters that cannot safely identify between different species. And if you look at this kind of snapshot here of the regulations here at the bottom, you can see that your bag limit is very dependent on your ability to be able to identify different species, and also in some cases be able to identify whether it's a male or a female. And so being able to be a successful waterfowl hunter, you need to have that kind of identification skill set built into your mind, so that as a bird comes in, you're not thinking, well, oh, is that a gadwall? Is that a male or a female? And again, these are things that are going to come with time. But I do want to just reiterate that the bag limits are going to be designed by species. They do change, or I shouldn't say they do change, but they can change annually as they update the migration path. They count and look at the overall harvest and the overall trends, and they may increase or decrease different species. You can see here in this newest version of the digest, this kind of highlighted section. So this is the section that was changed from the year prior. And so there's always these little reiterations. And so as a waterfowl hunter, it's important to not only be able to identify, but also keep track of these regulation changes. Now there's this other concept called party hunting. Now this is something that is not legal in Illinois. There are some states like Wisconsin even allows you to party hunt for deer, which means that people can hunt basically using somebody else's tag, for lack of a better explanation. But in terms of waterfowl hunting, let's say like in this picture, there's 4 of us in this blind, and we know that the basic bag limit for waterfowl is 6. So that tells us in that blind, we could shoot 24 ducks. Again, assuming we meet those species and gender requirements, we could shoot that many ducks. There are some hunters out there that will follow that mantra that we, as are in this blind, we are going to continually shoot until we get the bag limit for that entire blind. Excuse me, that is not legal. It is your personal daily bag limit. So if you're out there, and you shoot your 4 mallards, you're done, unless other species come in. Or if you're out pheasant hunting and you kill your 2 roosters, well, you are done. Even if other people in your party haven't filled their bag limit, unload your shotgun, sit there, enjoy the view, maybe talk. And if you're in a duck blind, maybe you can cook breakfast for the rest of us poor saps who haven't filled our limit yet. But we just wanted to highlight that party hunting is not legal in Illinois. And again, it's one of those things that's kind of rampant across the waterfowl community and bird hunting community. And it's always been that way. But again, just know that it is not legal in Illinois. Whenever you fill your individual personal bag limit, that's when you're done hunting for the day. And also, I should take that a step further too. Oh, never mind. Here it is. It's on this slide. If you're hunting with a bunch of people in a blind, kind of like that picture we just saw, when you are retrieving birds, you want to make sure that you're not piling everybody's carcasses into one big pile. You want to maintain those separate bag limits, just as kind of a follow-up. But when you're transporting these birds home, you always need to keep either the head or one fully feathered wing attached to that bird. So if you want to go through and field dress it and maybe start plucking those birds, you can do that. But again, when you're transporting it home, you need to keep either the fully feathered head or one fully feathered wing attached. And that's so that if a conservation officer does stop you, he can still be able to identify the sex and gender of those birds and still basically decide whether you're still within that legal bag limit or not. And again, if you're hunting public land, follow those checkout harvest reporting procedures. And this is one of those things that we probably should have made a separate slide on, but it just kind of came to me, especially with these checkout procedures. There's a lot of people out there who are, let's just say, untruthful in the harvest reporting, particularly at these sites where you're kind of going to check in and check out. And I think that's a huge ethical downfall of the hunting community. And a lot of, if you talk to people, the reason they do it is, oh, I don't want to, people to know that this is a really good dove hunting spot, because then it's just going to cause more people to come. But that is crucial data that the state makes decisions on our regulations. Those decisions are based on these harvest reporting. And so if they're dealing with inadequate and false data, that's going to lead to very substantial downfalls in the regulations and the processes and procedures that we as hunters have to follow. So every time you're filling out those harvest reporting and you're not being as truthful as you possibly can, it is hurting the hunting community. It's hurting the natural resources. It's hurting the wildlife, because it's not giving the biologists the accurate and factual numbers that they need to be able to utilize the different models that they use and to be able to make these projections so that we can have a sustainable harvest over time. So even at these check-in and check-out where you're just writing, a 2 or a 0 on how many you harvest or how many you saw, please be truthful, because again, that's vital information that DNR uses throughout their regulation processes, but as well as just how they manage the resource on a state or a site level, on a regional level, and then on a full state level. And another really important thing to kind of keep in mind, particularly with waterfowl, is the concept of invasive species. Obviously, we've seen a pretty significant destruction in a lot of our native ecosystems caused by different species that were brought in from outside of Illinois, and in many cases outside of North America. And so these are what we consider exotic species. Now, if they become so prevalent that they're starting to invade and take over habitats, that's when they're classified as an invasive species. And so it's very important that we as hunters do our part to combat these invasive species. And for waterfowl hunting, it couldn't really be simpler. It's just clean your gear, wipe it down, spray it off, get all that nasty seeds or bugs that may be on your waders, on your decoys. Just give everything a good, thorough cleaning so that you're not transporting different species from pond A to pond B as you continue hunting. And also, don't use exotic plants to cover your blinds. I know everyone's not full up on plant botany and plant identification, but if you go to this website here, protectyourwaters.net, or Be a Hero Transport Zero is a pretty common Illinois website that has a lot of really good resources on how to identify some of the more common invasive species that you're going to see. And that'll kind of give you some guidance to at least have kind of follow through with that. And after you start to be able to identify some of these plants, if you find new hotspots or new areas where you're seeing some of these invasive species pop up that historically they may not have been there, alert the site staff, because that's the information they need to know so that they can get on that, that spread before it basically takes over an entire habitat. So again, do your part and try to wash your waders, wash your decoys off, wash your decoy weights off, and just make sure you're not transporting species from pond A to pond B. Now, in your small game hunting, you don't need to be as cognizant of distance between hunters, particularly if you're squirrel or rabbit or upland hunting. In a lot of cases, you're fairly active. Now, I know in many cases with squirrel hunting, you may sit down for 20 to 30 minutes, but then you're going to be up and you're going to be moving. So the distance between hunters isn't as big of a concern, especially because these species are a lot more prolific and a lot more abundant on the landscape, and their habitat is not nearly as specific as, let's say, deer or turkey or waterfowl. They're kind of more generalist, so they can be a lot of different habitats. But I still try to stay with that same kind of 150 to 200 yards is kind of ideal. Other hunters will have low impact on each other, especially in terms of squirrel and rabbit hunting. Again, safe shot selection is critical, especially with squirrel hunting, because we're not going to be wearing blaze orange. You're not required to by law. You can be out there in plain camouflage. And so you always want to make sure you know what's in front and behind your target. And also never, ever shoot at a squirrel that is either in a cavity or in a dray, which a dray is essentially a nest up in a tree. So if you're ever walking the woods and you see a big clump of leaves up in the tree, chances are that's going to be a squirrel dray. And so if you're out squirrel hunting and you happen to see a squirrel maybe scurry into his dray, don't shoot at the dray. There's a lot of people that's kind of their first instinct is, oh, it's just leaves. My projectile will go straight through those leaves. That may be the case. Chances are there's could be offspring in that nest, and 99 times out of 100, that squirrel is not going to fall out of that nest, even if you do end up killing it. So don't shoot it at at squirrels that are in drays or in cavities. If you're patient enough and you just sit there for 10 or 15 minutes very quietly and discreetly, eventually that squirrel is going to come out of that nest and begin foraging on the ground again. And at that point, you can take your shot. And again, just like we discussed with party hunting in relation to waterfowl, the same concept pretty much applies here, that party hunting is not legal, and that your specific bag limit is your specific bag limit. It doesn't apply to a group. You can't just, round up and say, oh, well, there's 2 of us, so we can harvest 10 squirrels today. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. Each person gets that 5. And with that, I'll turn it over to Curtis.
All right, thanks, Dan. So yeah, when small game hunting with dogs, so rabbit hunting, often using beagles, there's some extra precautions that you want to keep in mind. And mainly it's to keep in mind of where those dogs are at all times. So never shoot low or close to any of the dogs. Right when they jump the rabbit, the rabbit might be right in front of the dogs. That's not the time to shoot them. And always default to the dog handler for all this stuff. If you're not sure, a lot of dog handlers won't shoot a rabbit on the jump at all. They want at least one full circle before you shoot. So always default to them, let them handle the dogs, know the property boundaries, and even though a dog can't get a trespassing ticket, dogs on someone else's land is your responsibility as the dog owner or handler. So you do need to be prepared to work around that and know how to deal with that. And of course, then make sure the dog's got water. Dogs are out there having the time of their lives running and going all over the place. And it's great if there's good fresh water there available for them to drink, but you definitely need to pack that in and make sure they've got access to it, because they are going to definitely work up a thirst out there. And then also look for injuries. Dogs so excited out there, they'll keep going even if they get scratched with a briar or something and need attention. So always constantly be looking for that. And if you see something, go ahead and speak up. I think with that, turn it over to Adam if he's back for the upland.
Yep. Thanks, Curtis. So with upland hunting, make sure to give yourself plenty of space during upland hunting. Many sites have specific fields. Public sites have specific fields that you need to stay in, usually for the first couple hours of hunting. And then later in the day, once people start going back home, finish with their hunt, you're able to kind of go into the other fields and walk where they have been. If you're able to walk around everywhere, then keep in mind you want about 200 to 300 yards of distance between you and other parties. That, of course, is ideal. That doesn't always happen, but make sure to kind of keep that distance in the back of your mind. And if you notice a party swinging to the left in the distance, make sure to honor their route and swing the opposite direction. Remember, everyone, again, wants the same outcome, so keep your distance, and you'll probably run into more birds doing so during your hunt.
And the nice thing about upland hunting is it's, you know, kind of I like to describe it as the exact opposite of deer hunting. You're not worried about what you smell like. You're not worried about what you look like. You can be fairly loud. And so it's fairly easy to communicate with other hunters that may be across the field, just kind of, you know, using hand gestures and say, hey, we're going this way and you're going that way. And it's a great way to, like Adam said, just kind of spread out and kind of just keep everybody hunting and keep everybody happy. But one thing I'd like to point out about, you know, having more people in the field is not always a bad thing. I know a lot of people always try to find that upland field that they pretty much have to themselves. Well, if you get in an area that has a fair amount of hunters, it's going to keep those birds up and fairly active. And there's been many cases where, you know, I've seen other hunters flush up a covey of quail or maybe flush up a rooster or two, and it would kind of fly and land in a different direction. And if it's an area that's closer to you than it is to them, you can make that decision to go after that covey or after that rooster. But if it happens to be, this is kind of why I brought it up. If it happens to be in the vicinity or in the direction that party line is moving, please don't go chase after that bird that you may have seen flush. I've had that happen a couple times on public land where I've kicked up maybe 2 roosters. I was able to get one, and I saw the other land, you know, about 100 yards in front of me, and I happened to catch a glimpse of another 2 hunters that happened to see that too, and they instantly came over and tried to flush that rooster that was basically, you know, right in line where we're going to be walking. So again, just be cognizant of that, and be open to communicating with those other hunters, and you'll all have a good, successful hunt. And it's also a great opportunity if you're out there and you don't have a dog, and there's, you know, a group of 2 or 3 other hunters out there and they have a dog or two. You know, it never hurts to ask and say, hey, do you care if I tag along? You know, I don't happen to have a dog. And in many cases, that's a great way to get out, get involved, and have a pretty solid hunt.
Sweet. So moving on to hunting or upland hunting safety tips. So at all times, know where your hunting partner and dogs are at. It's kind of up to everybody in the group. If you're hunting with a dog, of course, there's the main handler, but if you have eyes on the dog, make sure to call it out. You know, the handler should always be aware of where the dog is, but sometimes if it runs, you know, just out of sight, everyone else should be paying attention and keeping an eye on it as well. Know where your shooting zone is in relation to the place you're in the shooting line. So here on the top right picture, we kind of have a good safe zone of fire. You have your zones there for 3 people in a line. And again, only shoot birds that are above the horizon. So another good graphic here on the bottom, not safe to shoot on left and safe to shoot on the right. Kind of a term we like to use is you want to see blue under the belly. Moving on for upland hunting etiquette with a dog. The person who owns the dog, again, is the one who gives the commands. The owner who sets pace for the hunt, because he's, of course, in charge of the dog, so he knows how the dog works. So if the dog can cover areas quicker, you might move quicker. If they can cover the area nice and slow, then the owner will you know, let everyone else know, and you guys will move in a line slower. Make sure to have a leash for the dog at all times as well, in case you run into other dogs that might not be as friendly. And again, like I mentioned, everyone else should keep an eye out for the dog and the dog's location. And having an orange belly guard or a vest for the dog is very helpful with that.
And one thing to pay particular attention to with upland dogs, and Curtis kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier when talking about rabbits, but there's, again, this is a very generalized discussion, but there's kind of 2 groups of upland dogs. There's the flushers and the pointers. Now the pointers, they are trained to point out the location of where the bird is, where a flusher, his immediate job is he wants to get that bird in his mouth as quick as possible. And so in many cases, that's going to cause those flushing breeds to jump and try to catch that bird out of the air. And if we think back to what Adam said about, blue belly or blue sky beneath the belly of that bird, you want to let that bird escape the dog, so that you're not having an accident. So again, with flushers in particular, obviously with all dogs this is true, but with flushers in particular, you want to allow that bird to get a pretty good distance away from that dog and get elevated in the sky before you take that shot, because they will jump 3 to 4 feet in the air and try to grab that bird. And again, we don't want to have any accidents with any bird dogs.
And again, moving on to boundaries, similar to like we talked about earlier. Of course, if you're hunting public land, you want to stay just on the public. If you're hunting private land, of course, you have to have permission. So on public land, the fields will be assigned and you need to stay in them for the most part. That's usually how it works. And again, the fields will be mapped out. They will have maps that they'll hand out to you. And then you'll have to park in a specific parking lot. So make sure you're in the right parking lot. And again, make sure to pay attention to the boundaries. Be aware of where the no hunting zones are on the public land. Again, all of this will help you stay out of trouble and avoid getting in any interactions that you don't need to be in. And again, if your dog does get lost on private property, again, you're going to have to contact that landowner before you go, have permission to go search for your dog. So that's very important. It might be a good idea also to call the conservation officer. Sometimes they can help you get that permission if the landowner is a little leery. If you say you contacted the CPO and explain the situation, a lot of times they will help you get that permission as well.
Perfect. And now we're going to kind of dive into some of these scenarios. But before we start with this one, I want to bring up a scenario that relates specifically to pheasant hunting, as we just kind of covered upland hunting. Now, with these scenarios, we're not trying to influence your decisions. We're just trying to show you our thought process of how we have internally made these decisions for ourselves. And so you may disagree with us, and that's 100% fine. Again, this is your ethics, your personal decisions. But before we dive into this baiting one here, I want to bring up the concept of controlled pheasant hunts. So in Illinois, pheasant populations have been declining pretty rapidly for the past few decades. And to offset this, Illinois, I should clear this up, Illinois is not unique in this. There are many states that have the same program and have the same issues that arise with said program. But there is an option to hunt controlled pheasants in Illinois. Now, controlled pheasants are basically raised and they are released on that site, and then hunters can go out and hunt those birds. So again, that's an ethical decision you need to kind of make up front. Is that something you're interested in, or would you like to focus on the wild birds? And now I will say, in Illinois, as I mentioned, the wild pheasant population has been drastically decreasing. And a lot of that is due to habitat fragmentation, habitat loss across the board. So if you're only interested in harvesting, wild pheasants and wild birds, you may not have as much opportunity to hunt as somebody who is open to hunting controlled pheasants. So again, that's something you can personally decide on your own time. Now, me personally, I have gone on controlled pheasant hunts. It is a very distinct hunting style from wild birds. The birds are not as cautious to humans as the wild birds are. Now, it's certainly not you're just kind of walking out and there's a bird sitting under that bush and you walk out and kick it. It's still a hunt. You're still out there trying to find the birds, and it's not as easy as it sounds. But there is some distinct differences between that and hunting wild birds. So again, that's just a decision you need to make on your own. I'm personally okay with controlled pheasant hunting as long as you understand that you're hunting controlled birds. And I personally don't do it a ton, but it's a great way to kind of kick off the season and also get the dog some activity. Because again, it's hard to find wild birds in Illinois. And so if you want to have a good, well-trained bird dog, you may have to sneak in a few controlled pheasant hunts just to kind of get them up to snuff. But now we'll kind of move into this next scenario. So baiting deer is legal in some states. In Illinois, it is not legal at all. You can't even feed deer in Illinois. A lot of that is due to chronic wasting disease, which we've hit on in some of our other webinars. But you can hunt over agriculture food. So you can hunt over corn, you can hunt over soybean, you can hunt over an apple tree that's naturally dropping apples. But what you cannot do is go out there with a bucket full of apples and spread those around. And so the way baiting is defined in the wildlife code, which is where a lot of the regulations are based on, is you can legally hunt over any food source that is a natural and standard agricultural practice. So growing apple trees is a standard agriculture practice. Growing corn, growing soybeans, standard ag practice. Going out there and dumping apples, dumping a bag of corn, that is not considered a standard agriculture practice. So that's where that kind of big distinction between the two comes in. So you can certainly have food plots. You can have, standing corn, you can have cut corn. But you can't go out there and spread a bucket of corn because it's not a standard ag practice. Another scenario, and I'll have Curtis and Jason jump into this one too and give their thoughts, but I only use a longbow to hunt deer. I practice constantly so that my accuracy is better than compound shooters, and I'm comfortable out to 30 yards. Compound bows make it too easy, and I scoff at people who use them or crossbows.
Yeah, and that's actually a sculpture of me back there shooting my bow. So that's pretty cool.
Yep, I actually sculpted that.
Had to.
No.
This comes into yucking other people's yum, and unfortunately this is something that we see a lot right now, and especially on crossbows. But the same thing honestly happened 3 or 4 decades ago when everybody went from longbows, crossbows to compound bows. The same thing. And basically what it comes down to it, if I have time to go out and practice my recurve and put in that practice that it takes to get comfortably ethically with the shot that I can take, that's awesome. But to assume that every other hunter out there has that time and that ability to spend that time practicing or even having a place to go, that's just not feasible. So it's awesome that nowadays people can pick up a compound bow and not have to shoot too much and really be, ethical with that. And crossbows take it a step further. So, that's my thoughts. What were you going to say, Jason?
Sure. So I've gotten a lot of flack early on before crossbows have become more common. I'm an early adapter to crossbows. I had a crossbow for 14 years now. When I turned 18, I got a crossbow. It was the first bow I got. And there's a lot of reasons why I got a crossbow when I did. I lived in Pennsylvania, and it was the first year they legalized them. I finally had a job where I could afford a bow, and that's why I didn't have one before that. And my previous experience with bows, I didn't know anything about them really. And all I had was my dad's bow. I'm 6'4", which is pretty big, but my dad's 6'6", and his breaking point on his bow was by my ear, and he shot pretty heavy. So I would try to pull this thing back, and I just couldn't pull it back. And I thought that's how all bows were. I didn't think you could adjust, I didn't know anything about it. So then I'm just well, I can't barely pull this thing back. I mean, I was a string beam of a kid. I was 180 pounds. And I'm I'm just going to get a crossbow. Because and also all the time and all those things that you just listed there on why crossbow is kind of easier to pick up off the shelf and go hunting with after target practice for a couple afternoons. And getting a couple bullseyes there, almost right out of the box with these things nowadays, is why I went that way. Because my dad even said, he's well, we can get you a bow this year, and then you go hunting next year, or you can go hunting in a month, and you can practice until from all of August, and you can go hunting in October. And so that's what I went with. And I post photos on Facebook back and just a couple years ago, and people are like, oh, just shoot that at 60 yards, and it's no, I shot it at 20 yards. And people just have these conceptions about crossbows that they're just like shooting a rifle or something like that, and it's just not true. But yeah, I mean, that's just what I went with, and I haven't regretted it since, because I want to be ethical about hunting my animal, and I want to make sure that I make a good shot on the animal. So I'm happy with it.
Yep, that's kind of my closing thought on this too. I think you summed that up well. Whatever you as the hunter feel comfortable with, and whatever you think you can make the most ethical, humane shot at an animal that you can make, as long as that equipment's legal, I think you're making the right decision for yourself. And again, don't judge other people for the equipment they use. Everyone's got a different story. Everyone's got a different background. Everybody likes different gadgets and different toys. And some people find the appeal in the mechanics of a compound bow, and some like the traditional factor of a recurve or a longbow. And there's plenty of deer out there for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this next one is pretty near and dear to my heart. So a hunter can't find a downed dove in a field and starts a grid search to locate the bird. Now, being on public land, another hunter yells at you that you are costing him shots. So this is kind of a tricky scenario, because obviously we don't want to have confrontations with another hunters, especially I'll say heated confrontations. There are firearms involved, and we want to always maintain that calm and kind of relaxed behavior. We don't want to get too emotional. But me personally, I will do whatever I legally can to try to retrieve my game. So if I take a shot on a bird and I see that bird is hit and is down, I'm going to spend as much time as I deem necessary to try to recover that animal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually had this happen to me this past dove season. It was the first dove I shot. I saw it fall, and I went out to go get it, and I could not find it. And it stank, because it was the first day of the season too. So I mean, you're sitting there, you're waiting for it to happen, and I shot a dove in the first 10 minutes, and everybody else is blasting around me. I mean, safely, not right where I'm standing, but they're flying all over the place, and I'm still out there trying to find this dove. And I probably walked up and down every row of the sunflower patch that I was hunting on public land, and for about 30 yards one way or the other way, trying to find where this thing landed at. And I felt like I was missing out. I felt anxious because I was in front of everybody else. I didn't want to be scaring off everybody's doves. I ddidn't want to be in the way, and I just wanted to get out of the way. And so I went back to my seat. I don't even know how long I was out there for. I'm going to say it felt like a half hour. It's probably like 10 minutes, but it felt like I was being very thorough. And I went back to my seat, and again, I just memorized, like kind of visualized where that dove went and where I shot at. And I'm like, okay, that's the tallest sunflower plant. I'm going to go over there, and it's between me and there. And sure enough, I kicked it on the way over to the thing. I thought it landed in the sunflowers, but it landed in the field. So I was never going to find it in the sunflower rows. It was actually about 10 yards in front of the sunflower rows, but the way I saw it, it fell into the plants, but it didn't. But then I found it, and I didn't shoot anything before I found that thing. I just spent the first half hour to 45 minutes looking for it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the real important things about hunting is being able to lay down at night and say that you personally did everything you could to make an ethical shot and to recover that animal to the best of your ability. And there's instances where you're going to be put in kind of unique situations, like what Jason just described, where he was feeling anxious and you're frustrated, you feel kind of embarrassed. And then there's other instances where you may have to push your body a little bit. I know Jason can probably laugh at this story, but we were out pheasant hunting. Was it this past year together? And we both had our dogs. And
yep, it's that one photo with the dog where we had the Springer Spaniel and the Golden Retriever. And I have a photo of how far you had to go walk for this.
Yeah, and they both kicked up this beautiful rooster as a wild bird hunt. It was the first bird that we kicked up all season, and we're all excited. And I personally didn't really pay attention to where the bird was flying, and I took a shot. Now, looking back on it, if I would have waited, 5 seconds, I would not have taken the shot. I ended up making a pretty good shot on the bird, but it happened to fall into the pond. And again, this is a pheasant where they typically don't belong in a pond. And so I'm out there in 35-degree weather up to my belly button, trying to go through the water to find and recover this bird. I ultimately did, but again, it just shows that ethically you need to be prepared to put yourself in unique situations to deal with the emotions of a harvest, and to also take that next step to honor the life. I mean, you're essentially taking a life, not essentially, you are taking a life. You cannot remove blood from hunting. And so oftentimes you will have to push yourself a little bit to do your due diligence, to honor that life and to recover that animal to the best of your ability.
Yep. Yeah. And it was very dense cattails. It was probably about 30 yards of cattails that you had to wade through. And
That was
it was very impressive. It was very impressive, Dan. I gave you credit that day. I'm like, wow.
It ruined the rest of the hunt, but hey.
Yeah. We started seeing them after that, though. So that was
we
good.
did.
All right. Well,
Did
that
you,
ends.
did you swim out there, Dan, and pick it up in your mouth?
I should have. That would have made a good TikTok.
Yeah. Too bad they weren't labs.
Right.
All right, guys. So that's going to end our discussion tonight. And we appreciate you all hanging out with us and going over some common ethics and etiquette that you might see as you're learning how to hunt and getting out more. There's plenty more that this is what half of hunting camp's about, is discussing some of these topics, especially if you get into the scenario portion and seeing what you would and wouldn't do and where other people draw their lines and what you can learn from that. But we're going to close it up now. If you want to follow along with us for future webinars, you can see those posts on Illinois Learn to Hunt on Facebook and also our website where you registered for this webinar. So you can still use those links to find more information. And you can follow us on Instagram and YouTube. And we'll be posting some recorded webinars there throughout the summer that we might not have posted yet. So if you subscribe to that, you will get notified for that. So our last webinar we're going to be having this month is going to be on Thursday. We are going to be working with the Illinois Extension and going over wild game hunt to cook events. So we're just going to be discussing, again, some more about handling game properly on our end, and then Extensions is going to go more into the health and nutritional factors of wild game, as well as handling it and cooking it properly. So if you're interested in learning more about cooking wild game and the science and almost health aspects of handling wild game, check that out. We just went over that PowerPoint this afternoon. I gotta admit, it's pretty neat. We're gonna be covering some information that we've never covered before. So it's gonna be really interesting.
Yeah, and it's going to really hammer on kind of the food safety aspect. So, as we've talked about some of these ethical decisions that you need to make, there's again some ethical decisions that you'll need to make when you're processing it. Are you willing to spend the time to properly trim out, kind of the wound channel from a deer to remove that contaminated meat? Are you willing to have a little bit of meat loss and just kind of scoff that up? And so we'll dive into food safety. And like Jason said, we're really excited about this one. It's going to be a fun one.
Mm-hmm. With the photos all jumbled up here, there's time for questions and answers real quick. We are over on time, so maybe not too many, but if you have any burning questions you have left over, reach out to us. If we don't get to it right now, again, email us or Facebook message us and we'll get back to you.
We've got one question here from Edgar. I've never hunted. Why are deer hunted from stands? Is this by law? Great question. And it is not by law. That it's kind of the best way I like to describe it is it's a very Midwestern kind of heritage aspect of deer hunting, for lack of a better term. In the 70s, they started building these not portable, but these, permanent stands that they would kind of hang up in a tree. A lot of times it was just 2x4s and some plywood kind of snapped up there. That just allows you to get elevated, get a better vantage point of the overall terrain that you're watching and monitoring. But also deer have evolved with ground and terrestrial predators. They don't really have too many avian predators. And so they're not very commonly looking up in trees. They're always kind of just at the ground level, just kind of looking around, sniffing. And so over time, that just kind of ingrained in a lot of the Midwestern hunting culture is that, hey, if you want to hunt deer, you're going to hunt deer out of a tree stand. But over what we've seen in it's really been the last 5 years that I've seen it really transition this heavily. But there's a lot more people who are starting to apply a lot of the Western style of hunting, and they're starting to apply that to the way we hunt deer here in the Midwest. And so in the West, in the Western portion of the country, a lot of it is you're on the ground. You're doing a lot of stalking. You're doing a lot of glassing. So getting up on a ridge and just using binoculars and spotting scopes to try to find animals and go try to make an aggressive play and try to stalk that individual animal. I will say that is very difficult in the Midwest, but particularly on Illinois public land. A lot of our public land has been inundated with invasive species like bush honeysuckle is the main one that I'm kind of thinking of here, that has just really taken over a lot of our forests and our timber stands. And so it's really difficult to be able to even sneak through a lot of these areas quietly and, without making too much racket or too much movement. So historically, it's just always been done that way, but it is advantageous because it gets you up off the ground. You get a better vantage point, but also you get a little bit more kind of secrecy. But I have personally, last year, I didn't take a tree stand out with me for the first time ever. I've historically always bow hunted from a tree. I had a lot of success the past 2 years, bow hunting and firearm hunting for deer on the ground. I see Evan is actually in the chat right now. Evan is a person that I've been taking on deer hunts the past. We started last year and we're going to do it again this upcoming season. Went on a few turkey hunts, but we did everything hunting on the ground. While we didn't have success, we certainly had fun, and it also beats carrying around a 30-pound tree stand on your back. So that's kind of why, in a nutshell. Cool. Well, with that, like Jason said, if you have any questions, reach out to us at any time. And if you're new to the Learn to Hunt program, you can see some of these pictures here. We are going to be transitioning back to in-person workshops here, getting ready for the fall hunting season. So be on the lookout for those, where we do a lot of hands-on activities instead of just looking at PowerPoints and kind of us talking. We'll take you through the process of how to process a deer, how to hang a tree stand, how to use some of the various calls, how to scent proof yourself, how to check wind directions, how to scout. And so if you're interested, just stay tuned to all of our various social media channels, and you'll see those schedules come out here in the next few months. But with that, I think we'll close it out for the evening. So thanks for joining us, everybody.
Real quick, Dan, before we hit close, I forgot to point out there is the Illinois Learn to Hunt Connections. So if there's anyone who is very new here and who hasn't heard this yet, you can join that group, and you can ask permission to join that group, and we will give it to you, and you can go on there. And that's more of a communication type of chatting forum, more so than our regular Facebook page, where it's just kind of updates and information. So you can go to the Connections site and you can talk to past participants and kind of grow your social base from there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.